Hello there, and welcome back to another journey through time, where ancient stories meet the quiet hours of the night. Tonight we're settling in for something a little different, something vast and winding that's shaped human consciousness for thousands of years. We're going to walk through the entire story of the Bible, not as theology or doctrine, but as narrative, as the grand epic it truly is, when you step back and see it whole. Maybe you're here because sleep feels far away tonight. Or maybe you're just curious about one of history's most influential collections of stories. Either way, let's make this a slow journey together, one where you don't need to rush or keep track of every detail. Because the Bible, whatever your relationship with it, is ultimately a story about stories, about people trying to make sense of their place in an enormous, mysterious world. Before we begin wandering through these ancient landscapes, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight and what time it is where you are. Funny, isn't it? Here we are, separated by miles and time zones, but about to share the same collection of tales that have traveled across continents and centuries, passed down through countless voices and hands. If you enjoy this kind of long-form storytelling, where we take our time with big ideas and let them unfold naturally, I'd be grateful if you tapped like or subscribed. No pressure, just an invitation to join others who appreciate the slower side of learning. So settle in, maybe close your eyes if you can, and let your thoughts drift to the pace of ancient storytelling. We're going to begin at the very beginning, in a time before time, in a space before space, where the first words of this collection echo through darkness and silence. The Bible begins, not with a person or a place, but with an act. In the beginning it says, there was nothing. Not darkness exactly, because darkness implies the possibility of light. Not silence, because silence suggests the potential for sound. Just void, formless, empty. And then, into this nothingness, comes the first voice, speaking light into existence. It's a strange way to start a book when you think about it. Most stories begin with characters, with settings you can picture. But this one starts with the act of creation itself, with the idea that words have power, that speaking can bring forth reality from nothing at all. The creation story in Genesis unfolds like a poem, with rhythm and repetition. Day by day, piece by piece, the world takes shape. Light separates from darkness. Waters divide to make space for sky. Dry land emerges from the seas. And with each day, the refrain repeats, and God saw that it was good. It's methodical, almost meditative in its pacing. Plants appear before the sun that will feed them. Fish fill the waters before birds take to the air. There's an order to it, a progression that builds towards something. And that something turns out to be humanity itself, created not just as another species among many, but as something unique, something made in the image of the divine. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn, because no sooner are these first humans placed in paradise than they're faced with a choice. In the middle of the garden grows a tree, and they're told they can eat from every tree except this one. It's the first rule, the first boundary, the first test of what it means to have free will. You probably know how this goes. The serpent arrives with questions that sound reasonable enough. Did God really say you couldn't eat from any tree? And when that doesn't work, a bolder claim, you won't die if you eat from it. You'll become like God, knowing good and evil. The fruit looks good. It seems harmless. And in that moment, humanity makes its first choice to step outside the boundaries that had been set. They eat, and everything changes. Not just for them, but for every story that follows. Because what happens next isn't just punishment. It's the beginning of human history as we recognize it. Suddenly there's shame, there's hiding. There's the first lie when God asks where they are, and Adam points to the woman, saying she gave me the fruit. The first blame, the first fracture in relationship. They're expelled from the garden, and with that expulsion comes something new. The knowledge that life is finite, that choices have consequences, that the world is not always a safe place. But also something else, the promise that this isn't the end of the story. Even in the moment of banishment, there's a hint that somehow, someday, things might be set right again. Their first children, Cain and Abel, carry this tension forward. Two brothers, two different approaches to life. Abel tends flocks, Cain works the ground. Both bring offerings, but something goes wrong in the exchange. Cain's offering isn't accepted the way his brother's is, and jealousy takes root. The first murder happens in a field, brother killing brother. And when God asks Cain where Abel is, we get one of the most famous lines in all of literature, "Am I my brother's keeper?" It's a question that echoes through every story that follows, about responsibility, about community, about what we owe each other. Cain is marked and sent away, becoming a wanderer. But even in his punishment, there's protection. The mark ensures that no one who finds him will kill him. It's the first example of justice mixed with mercy, of consequences that somehow still leave room for redemption. The world fills with people, but the story suggests it doesn't fill with goodness. Violence spreads, the earth becomes corrupt, and so comes the Great Reset, the flood that will wash the world clean and start again with one family, Noah and his ark full of animals, riding out the storm that covers the earth. It's a strange story when you really think about it. The solution to human corruption is to start over with humans. As if the problem wasn't humanity itself, but something that could be washed away, something that could be begun again with better intentions and clearer instructions. Noah and his family survive, the waters recede, and they step out onto dry ground to find a world washed clean. The first thing Noah does is build an altar and offer sacrifices. The first thing God does is promise never to flood the world again, sealing that promise with a rainbow, a sign that destruction isn't the final word. But human nature, it turns out, wasn't drowned in the flood. Noah plants a vineyard, gets drunk, and ends up in a situation that brings shame on his family. His sons handle it differently, some with honor, some with mockery, and the divisions that will shape the rest of the story begin to emerge. The world fills again, but instead of spreading out as they'd been told, people gather in one place and decide to build a tower, a great monument that will reach toward heaven and make a name for themselves. It's the first great human project, the first attempt to achieve something godlike through their own effort. The Tower of Babel represents something profound about human nature, the desire to transcend limitations, to build something permanent, to make a mark that will last. But it also represents the fear of being scattered, of losing identity, of becoming small and insignificant in a large world. The response is swift and strange. Languages multiply overnight. People who had been working together suddenly can't understand each other. The great project falls apart, and humanity scatters across the earth, carrying different tongues, different ways of seeing and speaking about the world. It's here that the story shifts from the cosmic to the personal, from humanity in general to one particular family. Out of Ur of the Chaldeans comes a man named Abram, later Abraham, who hears a voice calling him to leave everything familiar and go to a land he's never seen. The promise attached to this call is enormous. He'll become a great nation, his name will be great, and through him all the families of the earth will be blessed. It's the first hint that the fractures that began in the garden, that deepened with Cain and Abel, that spread through the violence before the flood and the confusion at Babel, might somehow be healed. Abraham goes, taking his wife Sarah and his nephew Lot, following a promise toward an unknown future. It's an act of tremendous faith, but also tremendous uncertainty. He doesn't know where he's going or how the promise will be fulfilled. He just goes. The land he enters is already occupied. There's no empty territory waiting for him, no clear place to settle. He lives as a stranger, a sojourner, moving from place to place, building altars, calling on the name of the Lord, but never quite settling down. The promise seems impossible from the start. Abraham and Sarah are old, well past the age of having children, and yet the promise centers on descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, as countless as the sand on the seashore. How can a childless couple become a great nation? Years pass. The promise seems to fade. Sarah, practical and impatient, suggests that Abraham have a child with her servant, Hagar. It makes sense by the customs of the time, but it creates complications that ripple through generations. Hagar conceives and bears Ishmael, but the family dynamics become strained. Sarah becomes jealous of Hagar's pregnancy. Hagar, carrying the child of promise as she sees it, becomes proud toward her mistress. Abraham finds himself caught between two women, two different ideas of how the promise might be fulfilled. The tension builds until Hagar runs away into the wilderness, pregnant and alone. But there, by a spring of water, she encounters the divine directly. She's told to return, to submit for now, but also given a promise of her own. Her son will become a great nation too. She's the first person in the Bible to give God a name, calling him the God who sees me. When Ishmael is born, Abraham is 86 years old. For 13 years, it seems like this might be the fulfillment of the promise. The boy grows, and Abraham loves him as any father would love his son. But the story has more surprises in store. Abraham is 99 when God appears to him again, establishing a covenant that will mark his descendants forever. His name changes from Abram to Abraham, father of many nations. Sarah's name changes too, from Sarai to Sarah, princess. And the sign of the covenant is circumcision, a mark in the flesh that will distinguish Abraham's descendants from all other peoples. The promise becomes more specific. Sarah herself, now 90 years old, will bear a son. Abraham laughs. It's too ridiculous to believe. But within the year, against all natural possibility, Isaac is born. The birth of Isaac changes everything. He becomes the child of promise, the one through whom the covenant will continue. But his birth creates a problem. There are now two sons in Abraham's household, Ishmael and Isaac, and only one can inherit the promise. The tension comes to a head during Isaac's weaning celebration. Sarah sees Ishmael mocking, or perhaps just playing with, Isaac, and she demands that Abraham send Hagar and her son away. Abraham is distressed. He loves Ishmael too, but he's told to listen to Sarah's voice. Ishmael will become a nation, but Isaac will carry the covenant forward. So Hagar and Ishmael are sent into the wilderness with only bread and water. When the water runs out, Hagar puts the boy under a bush and goes away, so she won't have to watch him die. But God hears the boy's cry and provides water, and Ishmael survives to become the father of 12 princes, a great nation in his own right. Meanwhile, Isaac grows up as the beloved son, the miracle child, the fulfillment of impossible promises. But just when it seems the story has settled into predictable patterns, God asks the unthinkable. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and offer him as a sacrifice on a mountain I will show you. It's the ultimate test of faith, and perhaps the most troubling story in all of Scripture. Abraham, who has waited so long for this child, who has seen him as the fulfillment of divine promise, is asked to give him up. Not to disease or accident, but deliberately, as an offering. Abraham rises early, splits wood for the fire, saddles his donkey, and takes Isaac toward the mountain. For 3 days they travel together, the boy carrying the wood for his own sacrifice, though he doesn't know it yet. When Isaac asks where the lamb for the offering is, Abraham answers that God will provide the lamb. On the mountain, Abraham builds an altar, arranges the wood, binds his son, and raises the knife. At the last possible moment, a voice stops him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. A ram caught in a thicket provides the substitute sacrifice. Isaac is spared, and the place is named, "The Lord will provide." The promise is renewed with even greater emphasis. Because you have done this thing, your descendants will indeed be as numerous as the stars, and through them all the nations of the earth will be blessed. But what must Isaac have thought, walking down that mountain with his father? How do you process the moment when someone you trust completely is willing to sacrifice you, even if divine intervention saves you at the last second? The story doesn't tell us, but the psychological impact must have been enormous. Abraham lives to be 175 years old, seeing the promise begin to take shape but not its completion. When he dies, both Isaac and Ishmael come to bury him, suggesting that despite their separation, some bonds of family remain intact. Isaac marries Rebekah, and after 20 years of infertility, she finally conceives twins. Even in the womb, the children struggle with each other, and when they're born, one is holding the heel of the other. They name them Jacob, which means heel grabber or supplanter, and Esau, which means hairy. The twins couldn't be more different. Esau becomes a skillful hunter, a man of the field. Jacob is quieter, staying close to the tents. Isaac favors Esau, but Rebekah loves Jacob. The family fractures along these lines of preference, setting up conflicts that will shape the next generation. The first sign of trouble comes over something as simple as a bowl of stew. Esau returns from hunting, exhausted and famished, and finds Jacob cooking lentils. The smell is overwhelming to a man who hasn't eaten all day, and Esau begs his brother for some of that red stew. "Please, I'm dying of hunger." Jacob sees an opportunity. He's always been the clever one, the one who thinks before he acts, and he knows something about birthright that Esau has never seemed to value. The firstborn son inherits a double portion, becomes the head of the family, carries the covenant forward. It's worth everything, but to Esau in this moment, it's worth less than a meal. "Sell me your birthright first," Jacob says. And Esau, thinking only of his immediate hunger, agrees. What good is a birthright if I'm going to die anyway? He eats the stew, drinks some water, gets up and leaves, and the narrator adds this devastating line. Thus Esau despised his birthright. It's a transaction that will echo through generations. A moment of impulse trading away something precious for something temporary. But the story doesn't end there, because birthright and blessing aren't quite the same thing, and Isaac still has a father's blessing to give. Years pass. Isaac grows old, and his eyes grow dim. Feeling that death is near, he calls Esau and asks him to hunt some game and prepare his favorite meal, after which he'll give him the blessing that belongs to the firstborn. It's a touching scene. An old man wanting to taste the flavors he loves one more time before passing on the family inheritance. But Rebekah overhears. She's never forgotten the prophecy given when the twins were born, that the older would serve the younger. She sees this blessing as rightfully belonging to Jacob, and she's not above using deception to ensure he gets it. While Esau is out hunting, Rebekah prepares goat meat to taste like venison and covers Jacob's smooth arms and neck with goatskins to mimic his brother's hairiness. She dresses him in Esau's clothes so he'll carry his brother's scent, and sends him in to his blind father with the meal. The deception almost fails several times. Isaac is suspicious. The voice sounds like Jacob, but the hands feel like Esau's. "Are you really my son Esau?" Yes. Jacob lies. And Isaac, trusting his sense of touch more than his hearing, gives the blessing that cannot be taken back. May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth, plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you. Jacob has barely left when Esau returns with his own prepared meal. "Father, sit up and eat of your son's game, that you may bless me." But Isaac realizes what has happened, and he trembles violently. "Your brother came deceitfully and has taken your blessing." Esau cries out in anguish, "Bless me also, father." But the blessing has been given, and Isaac can only offer him a lesser inheritance. "You shall live by the sword and serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck." The family is shattered. Esau hates Jacob and plans to kill him as soon as their father dies. Rebekah hears of the threat and sends Jacob away to her brother Laban in Haran, ostensibly to find a wife from among their relatives, but really to escape his brother's murderous anger. Jacob leaves home with nothing but a staff, fleeing the consequences of his deception. On his first night away, sleeping in the open with stones for pillows, he has a dream that changes everything. A ladder stretches from earth to heaven, and angels ascend and descend on it. At the top stands God himself, renewing the promises made to Abraham and Isaac. "The land on which you lie I will give to you and your offspring. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, spreading in all directions. Through you and your offspring, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and bring you back to this land." Jacob wakes in awe and fear. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, the gate of heaven." He sets up the stone he'd used as a pillar, pours oil on it, and names the place Bethel, house of God. He makes a vow. If God will be with him and keep him safe and provide for his needs, then the Lord shall be his God, and he'll give back 1/10 of everything he receives. It's the beginning of a relationship that will transform him, though the transformation won't come easily. Jacob continues to Haran and meets his cousin Rachel at a well. She's beautiful, and he falls in love immediately, rolling away the heavy stone that covers the well so her sheep can drink. When he tells her who he is, she runs to tell her father, and Laban comes out to embrace his nephew with apparent joy. Jacob agrees to work 7 years for Rachel's hand in marriage, and the text says those years seemed like only a few days because of his love for her. But on the wedding night, Laban substitutes his older daughter Leah, and Jacob doesn't discover the deception until morning. The irony is perfect. The deceiver has been deceived. The man who disguised himself to steal his brother's blessing wakes up married to the wrong woman because he was deceived by disguise. Laban's excuse is that it's not their custom to give the younger before the older, which must have stung Jacob particularly deeply. Laban agrees to give Rachel as well, but only after Jacob completes Leah's bridal week and promises to work another 7 years. So Jacob finds himself with 2 wives, loving one and feeling obligated to the other, a situation that breeds nothing but trouble. God sees that Leah is hated and opens her womb, while Rachel remains barren. Leah bears 4 sons in quick succession: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, each time hoping that this child will finally make her husband love her. With Judah, she seems to find a different kind of peace, saying, "This time, I will praise the Lord." Rachel, desperate for children, gives her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a surrogate, and Bilhah bears Dan and Naphtali. Not to be outdone, Leah gives her servant Zilpah to Jacob, and Zilpah bears Gad and Asher. The competition between the sisters plays out through their children and their servants. A strange incident with mandrakes, plants believed to help with fertility, leads to Leah bearing 2 more sons, Issachar and Zebulun, and a daughter Dinah. Finally, God remembers Rachel and opens her womb, and she bears Joseph, saying, "God has taken away my reproach, and may the Lord add to me another son." Jacob now has 11 sons and 1 daughter, but he's also been in Haran for 14 years, working for Laban, and he wants to return home. Laban doesn't want to let him go because he's prospered greatly since Jacob arrived, but Jacob negotiates a deal for wages. asking for all the speckled, spotted, and dark-coloured sheep and goats. What follows is a complex story of selective breeding, or perhaps divine intervention, that results in Jacob's flocks multiplying dramatically while Laban's remain ordinary. Laban changes Jacob's wages 10 times, but each time Jacob prospers. The relationship between the two men grows increasingly strained. Finally, God tells Jacob it's time to return to the land of his fathers. Jacob gathers his wives and children and flocks and leaves while Laban is away shearing sheep. Rachel steals her father's household gods, perhaps as inheritance or insurance, and hides them under her camel's saddle. When Laban discovers they've gone, he pursues them for 7 days. God warns him in a dream not to say anything good or bad to Jacob, but Laban still confronts his son-in-law about leaving secretly and stealing his gods. Jacob, not knowing Rachel has taken them, invites Laban to search everything and declares that whoever has stolen them shall die. Laban searches, but doesn't find the gods because Rachel sits on them and claims she cannot get up due to her monthly period. The deception works, and after some heated words between the two men, they make a covenant, setting up a stone pillar as a witness that neither will cross this boundary to harm the other. Jacob continues toward home, but as he approaches the land of his birth, he's forced to confront the brother he deceived and fled from 20 years earlier. He sends messengers ahead to Esau, humbly describing himself as Esau's servant. But the messengers return with disturbing news. Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. Jacob is terrified. He divides his family and flocks into 2 groups, thinking that if Esau attacks one, the other might escape. He prays desperately, reminding God of the promises made at Bethel and pleading for deliverance from his brother's hand. Then he does something characteristic. He tries to solve the problem with gifts. He selects hundreds of animals, goats, sheep, camels, cattle, donkeys, and sends them ahead in separate droves with servants instructed to tell Esau their gifts from his servant Jacob, who is coming behind. The night before the meeting, Jacob sends his family across the ford of the Jabbok River, and he's left alone. There in the darkness, someone wrestles with him until dawn. It's a mysterious encounter, this stranger who fights Jacob all night without being able to overcome him, who strikes Jacob's hip socket so that it's wrenched, but who still cannot prevail. As dawn approaches, the stranger asks to be released, but Jacob refuses. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" "Jacob." "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Jacob asks the stranger's name, but receives no answer, only a blessing. Jacob names the place Peniel, face of God, for I have seen God face to face, and my life has been preserved. He limps away as the sun rises, permanently marked by this encounter with the divine. The meeting with Esau is anticlimactic after the night of wrestling. Esau runs to embrace his brother, falls on his neck, kisses him, and they both weep. The anger and murderous intent of 20 years earlier seems to have dissolved. Esau doesn't need Jacob's gifts. He's prospered in his own right, but Jacob insists he accept them as a sign of reconciliation. They part peacefully, Esau returning to his territory in Seir, Jacob settling near the city of Shechem. But peace doesn't last long. Jacob's daughter Dinah goes out to visit the women of the land and is seen by Shechem, the son of the local prince, who takes her and lies with her. Whether it's rape or seduction, the text isn't entirely clear, but Shechem genuinely seems to love Dinah afterward and asks his father to arrange a marriage. Jacob's sons are outraged at what they see as the defilement of their sister, but they speak deceitfully to Shechem and his father. They agree to the marriage on one condition: all the men of the city must be circumcised, so that we may become one people. It seems reasonable to Shechem and his father, and they convince the men of their city to undergo the procedure. On the 3rd day, when the men are still sore from circumcision, 2 of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, take their swords and attack the city, killing all the males, including Shechem and his father. They rescue Dinah and plunder the city, taking the women, children, and livestock as spoil. Jacob is horrified. "You have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land. If they gather against me and attack, I and my household will be destroyed." But his sons ask, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" It's a brutal story that reveals the violent potential lurking within this chosen family. The same capacity for deception that Jacob showed toward his father and that Laban showed toward Jacob now appears in his sons, but with deadly consequences. God tells Jacob to go up to Bethel, the place where he'd encountered the divine ladder years earlier. Before they go, Jacob tells his household to put away their foreign gods, purify themselves, and change their clothes. They give him all their foreign gods and their earrings, and he buries them under an oak tree. At Bethel, God appears to Jacob again, confirming his new name Israel and renewing the promises of land and descendants. Jacob sets up another stone pillar and pours oil on it, marking this place as holy. This moment is significant in his relationship with the divine. They leave Bethel, but tragedy strikes on the way to Ephrath. Rachel, pregnant with her second child, goes into hard labor. The midwife tells her not to fear, that she's having another son, but Rachel dies giving birth. With her last breath, she names the child Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, but Jacob calls him Benjamin, son of the right hand. Rachel is buried on the way to Bethlehem, and Jacob sets up a pillar over her grave. It's a monument to love and loss, to the woman he worked 14 years to marry, who gave him Joseph and now Benjamin, before dying in childbirth. Jacob now has 12 sons, the future 12 tribes of Israel. But the family dynamics remain troubled. His obvious favoritism toward Joseph, Rachel's firstborn, creates resentment among the other brothers. Joseph doesn't help matters by telling them about his dreams in which they all bow down to him. In one dream, they're binding sheaves in the field when Joseph's sheaf stands upright and their sheaves bow down to it. In another, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bow down to him. Even Jacob rebukes him for this second dream. "Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" The brothers hate Joseph for his dreams and for their father's favoritism, but they're about to take that hatred to a terrible extreme. When they're pasturing the flocks far from home and Jacob sends Joseph to check on them, they see him coming in his famous coat of many colors and plot to kill him. "Let's kill this dreamer and see what becomes of his dreams," they say. But Reuben, the eldest, persuades them to throw Joseph into a pit instead, planning secretly to rescue him later. They strip off his special coat and throw him into an empty cistern. While they're eating their meal, they see a caravan of Ishmaelites heading toward Egypt with spices and goods. Judah suggests they sell Joseph to the merchants instead of killing him. After all, he's their brother. They pull Joseph out of the pit and sell him for 20 pieces of silver. To cover their crime, they dip Joseph's coat in goat's blood and bring it to their father. Jacob recognizes it immediately and concludes that a wild beast has devoured his beloved son. He tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth, and mourns for many days, refusing all comfort from his children. "I shall go down to the grave mourning for my son." Meanwhile, Joseph is sold in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. The boy who dreamed of greatness finds himself a slave in a foreign land, separated from everything familiar, apparently forgotten by both his family and his God. But the story isn't over. In fact, in many ways, it's just beginning. Because sometimes the path toward promise leads through betrayal, and sometimes the road to blessing runs straight through the heart of suffering. Joseph's story in Egypt begins in the house of Potiphar, where something remarkable happens. Despite being a slave, despite being far from home and family, Joseph prospers. The text says that the Lord was with Joseph, and everything he touched seemed to flourish. Potiphar notices this and puts Joseph in charge of his entire household. It's a strange reversal of fortune. The boy thrown into a pit by his own brothers now manages the affairs of one of Egypt's most important officials. But Joseph's success brings its own dangers. Potiphar's wife notices this young, capable Hebrew slave and begins to pursue him relentlessly. Day after day, she asks him to lie with her. Joseph refuses, not just because of loyalty to his master, but because he sees it as a sin against God. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? It's a question that reveals something profound about Joseph's character. Even in slavery, even in a foreign land, he maintains his moral compass. But rejection breeds resentment, and when Joseph continues to refuse her advances, Potiphar's wife turns vindictive. One day when the household is empty, she grabs Joseph's garment as he flees from her proposition. Left holding his cloak, she concocts a story of attempted rape, claiming the Hebrew slave tried to assault her. When Potiphar returns and hears his wife's accusation, Joseph is thrown into prison. It seems like the end of his prospects, another pit, another betrayal. But even in prison, the pattern repeats itself. The Lord is with Joseph, and he finds favor with the keeper of the prison, who puts him in charge of all the prisoners. In this unlikely place, Joseph encounters two fellow prisoners who will course of his life. Pharaoh changed Theo's chief butler, and chief baker have both offended their master and been thrown into custody. One night, both men have disturbing dreams that leave them troubled and confused. Joseph notices their distress and asks what's wrong. They explain about their dreams, lamenting that there's no one to interpret them. Joseph's response reveals his growing understanding of his own gifts. Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please. The butler's dream involves a vine with 3 branches that bud, blossom, and produce grapes. He squeezes the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and places it in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph interprets this as good news. In 3 days, Pharaoh will restore the butler to his position. The baker, encouraged by this positive interpretation, shares his own dream. 3 baskets of baked goods are on his head, but birds are eating from the top basket. Joseph's interpretation is grimmer. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up the baker's head and hang him on a tree where birds will eat his flesh. Both interpretations come true exactly as Joseph predicted. The butler is restored to his position, and the baker is executed. As the butler is released, Joseph makes one request. Remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. But the butler, once restored to his comfortable position, forgets all about the young Hebrew who interpreted his dream correctly. Joseph remains in prison, forgotten again, his gift for interpretation apparently wasted on someone too selfish or too busy to remember a kindness. 2 full years pass. Joseph might have wondered if God had abandoned him entirely, if the dreams of his youth were mere fantasy, if he would spend the rest of his life in an Egyptian prison. But then Pharaoh himself begins having dreams that trouble him so deeply he can't sleep. In the first dream, Pharaoh stands by the Nile and sees 7 cows, fat and sleek, come up from the river to graze. Then 7 other cows, gaunt and thin, come up and devour the fat cows, but remain just as thin as before. In the second dream, 7 ears of grain, full and good, grow on a single stalk. Then 7 ears, thin and blighted by the east wind, spring up and swallow the good ears. Pharaoh wakes disturbed and calls for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt, but none can interpret his dreams. That's when the butler finally remembers Joseph and tells Pharaoh about the young Hebrew in prison, who interprets dreams accurately. Pharaoh sends for Joseph immediately. They shave him and give him clean clothes, the first time in years he's appeared as anything other than a prisoner or slave. Standing before the most powerful man in the known world, Joseph is asked if he can interpret dreams. Joseph's answer shows how his understanding has deepened through suffering. I cannot do it. But God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. He's learned that his gift isn't his own. That interpretation belongs to God, and that even his suffering has been part of a larger plan he couldn't see. Pharaoh tells his dreams, and Joseph's interpretation is both clear and urgent. The 7 fat cows and full ears represent 7 years of great abundance. Throughout, blighted ears represent 7 years of severe Egypt. The 7 thin cows and famine that will follow, so severe it will consume all the abundance of the good years. But Joseph doesn't stop with interpretation. He offers a plan. Let Pharaoh find a man who is earning and wise and dist, set him over the land of Egypt. Appoint overseers to collect 1/5 of all the produce during the 7 abundant years and store it in the cities. This food will be a reserve for the 7 years of famine. The plan impresses Pharaoh and his officials. But more than that, they recognize something in Joseph that goes beyond clever administrative thinking. Can we find a man like this, in whom is the Spirit of God? Pharaoh asks his servants. In a moment that must have seemed impossible to the 17-year-old boy thrown into a pit by his brothers, Pharaoh removes his signet ring and puts it on Joseph's finger, dresses him in fine linen, puts a gold chain around his neck, and makes him second in command over all Egypt. Only in the throne will Pharaoh be greater than Joseph. Joseph is 30 years old when he enters Pharaoh's service, 13 years after being sold into slavery. The dreams of his youth, the dreams that made his brothers hate him, suddenly don't seem so far-fetched. But Joseph has been changed by his journey through suffering. The arrogant boy who flaunted his dreams has become a man who credits God for his gifts. During the 7 years of abundance, Joseph travels throughout Egypt, organizing the collection and storage of grain. He marries Asenath, daughter of an Egyptian priest, and she bears him 2 sons. He names the first Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." The second he names Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." The names reveal Joseph's state of mind. He's found success, marriage, children, but there's still pain in the forgetting and the acknowledgement of affliction. Egypt has become home, but it's not the home of his childhood dreams. When the 7 years of plenty end, the famine begins, just as Joseph predicted. It's not limited to Egypt, but spreads throughout the known world. People from every nation come to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine is severe over all the earth. In Canaan, Jacob and his family feel the bite of hunger. When Jacob hears there's grain in Egypt, he tells his sons to go there and buy food so they won't die. 10 of Joseph's brothers make the journey, but Jacob keeps Benjamin at home, fearing that harm might come to Rachel's other son. When the brothers arrive in Egypt and bow down before the governor to buy grain, they don't recognize the brother they sold into slavery 22 years earlier. But Joseph recognizes them immediately, and suddenly his childhood dreams make perfect sense. Here are his brothers, bowing down to him just as the dreams predicted. Joseph chooses not to reveal his identity. Instead, he speaks harshly to them through an interpreter, accusing them of being spies who have come to see the nakedness of the land. The brothers protest their innocence, explaining they're 12 brothers from Canaan, sons of one man. The youngest is with his father, and one no more. That phrase, "one is no more," must cut deeply. They speak of Joseph as dead while he stands before them, but they don't know it. Joseph tests them further, demanding they bring their youngest brother to prove they're not spies. He keeps Simeon as a hostage and sends the others home with grain, but secretly returns their money to their the brother sacks. When discover the money on their journey is home, they're terrified. What go this that has done to us? Back in Canaan, they tell Jacob everything that happened, how the Lord of the land spoke roughly to them, kept Simeon prisoner, and demanded they bring Benjamin back. Jacob is devastated. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more. Wool, and now you take Benjamin. All this has come against me. He refuses to let Benjamin go, even when Reuben offers his own 2 sons as surety. But as the famine continues and their grain runs out, they have no choice. Judah finally convinces his father by taking personal responsibility for Benjamin's safety. I will be a pledge of his safety. From my hand you shall require him. If I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before you forever. Jacob reluctantly agrees, but sends gifts to soften the Egyptian governor: balm and honey, gum and myrrh, pistachio nuts and almonds. He also sends double the money, in case the returned money was an oversight. Most importantly, he sends Benjamin. When the brothers arrive in Egypt with Benjamin, Joseph is so moved he has to leave the room to weep in private. He orders a feast prepared and seats the brothers in order from oldest to youngest, which amazes them. Benjamin receives 5 times as much food as the others, another test of the family dynamics Joseph remembers so well. But Joseph isn't finished testing them. He has his steward place his own silver cup in Benjamin's sack, along with the money for the grain. After the brothers leave the next morning, Joseph sends his steward after them to search for the missing cup. When it's found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers are devastated. They tear their clothes in the ancient gesture of grief and return to the city falling before Joseph. Judah speaks for them all. What shall we say to my Lord? How shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Joseph offers keep to only Benjamin as his slave, and let the others return home. It's the ultimate test. Will they abandon their youngest brother as they once abandoned Joseph? Will jealousy and self-preservation win again? Judah's response marks a transformation in the family. He steps forward and offers himself as a slave instead of Benjamin, explaining that if Benjamin doesn't return, their father will die of grief. I cannot go back to my father if the lad is not with me, lest I see the evil that would come upon my father. It's the moment Joseph has been waiting for, evidence that his brothers have changed, that they've learned something from their past cruelty. Joseph can no longer control himself and orders all his attendants to leave. Then he reveals himself to his astonished brothers. I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? The brothers are so shocked they can't answer him. Joseph has to repeat himself and call them closer. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. It's a moment of forgiveness that reframes everything that's happened. Joseph doesn't deny the wrong they did, but he places it within a larger story of divine providence. What they meant for evil, God meant for good. The famine will last 5 more years, and God sent Joseph ahead to preserve their family and many others. Pharaoh himself welcomes the news that Joseph's family is alive and invites them all to come to Egypt. He offers them the best land in the region of Goshen and tells them not to worry about their belongings, because the good of all the land of Egypt will be theirs. Joseph sends wagons to carry his father and the little ones, along with provisions for the journey. To each brother he gives changes of clothing, but to Benjamin he gives 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothing. To his father he sends 10 donkeys loaded with good things from Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread for the journey. The reunion between Joseph and Jacob is overwhelming. Joseph harnesses his chariot and goes to meet his father in Goshen. When they see each other, Joseph falls on his father's neck and weeps for a long time. Jacob says to Joseph, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." The family that was fractured by jealousy and deception, scattered by famine and hardship, is finally reunited. Jacob, now called Israel, settles in Egypt with all his descendants, 70 people in total. They're given the land of Goshen, the best pasture land in Egypt, and they prosper there. But Jacob knows he won't live much longer. Before he dies, he calls Joseph and makes him swear not to bury him in Egypt, but to carry his body back to Canaan. to the burial place of his fathers. It's a final assertion that Egypt, comfortable it's as become, is not their permanent home. Jacob lives 17 more years in Egypt, reaching the age of 147. On his deathbed, he blesses Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, adopting them as his own and giving them inheritance rights equal to his other sons. In a final act that echoes the reversals throughout this story, he gives the greater blessing to Ephraim, the younger, despite Joseph's attempt to guide his father's right hand to Manasseh, the firstborn. Then Jacob gathers all his sons for final blessings that are part prophecy, part character assessment receive. Some positive words, others harsh judgments that reflect their past actions. Judah, who offered himself for Benjamin and showed such leadership and responsibility, receives the promise that the scepter will not depart from his tribe and that his brothers will bow down to him. When Jacob dies, he's embalmed according to Egyptian custom, and the Egyptians mourn him for 70 days. Joseph and his brothers, along with a great company of Egyptian officials, carry Jacob's body back to Canaan and bury him in the cave of Machpelah, where Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah and Leah are already buried. After the burial, the brothers fear that Joseph has only been kind to them for their father's sake, and that now he'll take revenge. They send him a message claiming Jacob had asked Joseph to forgive his brother's transgression. When they come to him, they fall down before him again and offer to be his servants. Joseph weeps when they speak to him this way. "Don't be afraid," he tells them. "Am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones." Joseph lives to 110 years old and sees his great-great-grandchildren. Before he dies, he makes his brothers swear an oath. "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." Like his father, Joseph refuses to let Egypt become the final resting place for his family, even though it's been good to them. The book of Genesis ends with Joseph's death and embalming, but not with coff burial. His sin remains in Egypt, a reminder of a promise yet to be fulfilled, a journey still to be completed. The family that began with Abraham's call to leave his homeland has grown into a nation, but they're still not in the land of promise. 400 years pass in what seems like silence. The Israelites multiply greatly in Egypt, but their situation gradually changes. A new Pharaoh arises who doesn't know Joseph, and the Israelites are enslaved, forced to build store cities for their oppressors. What had been refuge becomes bondage, but this too is part of a larger story that's still unfolding. During this time of slavery, when it seems like God has forgotten the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a baby is born who will change everything. His mother hides him for 3 months, then places him in a basket among the reeds of the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter finds him there and names him Moses, because I drew him out of the water. Moses grows up in Pharaoh's household, educated in all the wisdom of Egypt, but he never forgets his Hebrew identity. When he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, he kills the Egyptian and hides his body in the sand. The next day, when he tries to stop 2 Hebrews from fighting, one asks, "Who made you a ruler and judge over us? Do you intend to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses realizes his deed is known and flees Egypt for the wilderness of Midian, where he settles down, marries, and becomes a shepherd. For 40 years he tends flocks in the desert, perhaps wondering if he'll spend the rest of his life as an exile, far from both his Hebrew heritage and his Egyptian upbringing. But one day, while leading his flock to the far side of the wilderness, Moses sees something extraordinary. A bush is burning but not being consumed by the flames. When he turns aside to investigate this strange sight, a voice calls to him from the burning bush, "Moses, Moses!" And Moses answers, "Here I am." "Do not come near," the voice says. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hides his face, afraid to look at God. The voice continues with words that will reshape history. "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." The promises made to Abraham are about to be fulfilled, but not in the way anyone might have expected. God is calling Moses, now 80 years old, to return to Egypt and demand that Pharaoh let the Israelites go. Moses objects repeatedly. "Who am I that I should go? What if they don't believe me? I'm not eloquent, I'm slow of speech." But God provides answers to every objection and gives Moses signs to perform, his staff turning into a serpent, his hand becoming leprous and then clean again. When Moses still protests that he's not a good speaker, God becomes angry and appoints Aaron, Moses' brother, to be his spokesman. Moses returns to Egypt after 40 years of exile, no longer the impulsive young man who killed an Egyptian in anger, but a reluctant leader shaped by decades in the wilderness. He and Aaron gather the elders of Israel and perform the signs God has given them. The people believe and worship when they hear that God has seen their affliction. But Pharaoh is not impressed when Moses and Aaron appear before him with their demand. "Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Pharaoh's response reveals both his arrogance and his ignorance. "Who is the Lord? And let Israel go. I do not, that I should obey him, know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Instead of releasing the Israelites, Pharaoh makes their slavery worse, no longer providing straw for making bricks, but requiring the same daily quota. The Israelite foremen are beaten when the quotas aren't met, and they complain bitterly to Moses. "Ever since you went to Pharaoh to speak in his name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." Moses takes their complaint to God, and the answer reveals the larger pattern at work. "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh of Miao. Because mighty hand he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." What follows is a contest between the God of Israel and the gods of Egypt, played out through 10 increasingly severe plagues. The first plague turns the Nile to blood, but Pharaoh's magicians duplicate the feat, and Pharaoh's heart remains hard. The second brings frogs throughout the land, covering houses, beds, ovens, and kneading bowls. Pharaoh promises to let the people go if Moses removes the frogs, but when the plague ends, he changes his mind. The third plague brings gnats from the dust of the earth. This time, Pharaoh's magicians cannot duplicate the sign and tell him, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart remains hard. The fourth plague brings flies, but only to the Egyptians. The land of Goshen, where the Israelites live, is spared. With each plague, the distinction between Egypt and Israel becomes clearer. The fifth plague kills all the Egyptian livestock, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites dies. The sixth brings painful boils on people and animals throughout Egypt, but again the Israelites are protected. The seventh plague is hail mixed with fire, the worst hailstorm in Egypt's history. It destroys crops and kills people and animals caught in the open, but no hail falls in Goshen. Some Egyptians begin to fear the Lord and bring their slaves and livestock indoors when Moses warns of the coming hail. Pharaoh seems to relent after the hail. "I have sinned this time. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong." But when the hail stops, he hardens his heart again and refuses to let the Israelites go. The eighth plague brings locusts that devour everything green that's officials survived the hail. Pharaoh plead with him to let the Israelites go before Egypt is completely ruined. But Pharaoh will only allow the men to go, not the women and children. The ninth plague brings darkness over all Egypt for 3 days, a darkness so thick it can be felt. but the Israelites have light in their dwellings. Pharaoh offers to let all the people go if they leave their flocks and herds behind, but Moses insists they need their animals for sacrifices. The confrontation reaches its climax when Pharaoh tells Moses, "Get out of my sight. Make sure you do not appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." Moses agrees, "You are right. I will never appear before you again." But there's one more plague coming, and it will break Pharaoh's resistance completely. Moses announces that at midnight, God will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, from Pharaoh's son to the firstborn of the slave girl, and all the firstborn of the cattle. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again. But the Israelites are given specific instructions for protection. Each family is to take a lamb without blemish, keep it for 4 days, then slaughter it at twilight. They're to take some of the blood and put it on the doorframes of their houses, then roast the lamb and eat it with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They're to eat it in haste, dressed for travel with sandals on their feet and staff in hand. It's the Passover of the Lord. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. At midnight, exactly as Moses predicted, the Lord strikes down all the firstborn in Egypt. Pharaoh's son dies, and the firstborn of every Egyptian household. There's not a house without someone dead, and loud wailing fills the night. But where the blood marks the doorframes of Israelite homes, death passes over. Pharaoh summons Moses and Aaron in the night. "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds and go, and also bless me." The Egyptians urge the people to hurry and leave, fearing they'll all die if the Israelites remain. The Israelites ask their Egyptian neighbors for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord has made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they give them what they ask for. So they plunder the Egyptians as they leave, taking wealth as well as freedom. About 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, leave Egypt that night, along with large droves of livestock. They've been in Egypt for 430 years, and their departure happens exactly on the anniversary of their arrival. They take with them the bones of Joseph, fulfilling the oath their ancestors had sworn. But their troubles aren't over. When Pharaoh realizes what he's done, he changes his mind again. Why did we do this? Why did we let the Israelites go and lose their services? He harnesses his chariot and takes his army with him, 600 of the best chariots along with all the other chariots of Egypt. The Israelites are camped by the sea when they see the Egyptian army approaching. Trapped between the army and the water, they cry out in fear and anger to Moses. "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt?" Moses tells them not to be afraid, to stand firm and see the deliverance the Lord will bring. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. But God tells Moses to stop crying out and take action. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water, so the Israelites can go through on dry ground. The angel of God moves from in front of the Israelites to behind them, and the pillar of cloud moves to stand between the Egyptian army and the Israelites, bringing darkness to one side and light to the other. All that night, the Lord drives the sea back with a strong east wind, turning it into dry land. The Israelites walk through the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on their right and their left. The Egyptian army follows them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen pursuing them between the towering walls of water. In the last watch of the night, the Lord looks down on the Egyptian army through the pillar of fire and cloud and throws them into confusion. He jams the wheels of their chariots so they have difficulty driving, and the Egyptians cry out in terror, "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt, but it's too late for escape. The Lord tells Moses to stretch out his hand over the sea, so the waters will flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen. As the sun rises, Moses stretches out his hand, and the sea flows back to its place. The Egyptians flee toward it, but the Lord sweeps them into the sea. The water flows back and covers the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survives. But the Israelites go through the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on their right and their left. That day, the Lord saves Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel sees the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. When the Israelites see the mighty hand the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people fear the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Moses and the Israelites sing a song of triumph. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. It's a moment of pure jubilation, of gratitude for deliverance that seemed impossible just hours before. But the wilderness that stretches before them is harsh and unforgiving. For 3 days they travel without finding water, and when they finally reach Mara, the water there is bitter and undrinkable. The people grumble against Moses. What are we to drink? Moses cries out to the Lord, who shows him a piece of wood that sweetens the water when thrown into it. It's the first of many tests in the wilderness, and it establishes a pattern that will repeat throughout their 40-year journey. Crisis leads to complaint. Complaint leads to intercession. And God provides what's needed, often in unexpected ways. But each provision seems to be forgotten when the next crisis arises. They come to Elim, where there are 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camp there by the water. It's a place of rest and refreshment, a glimpse of what the promised land might offer. But they can't stay. The journey continues into the desert of Sin, where a new complaint arises. The whole Israelite community grumbles against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. It's remarkable how quickly freedom can feel like a burden when it comes with uncertainty and hardship. Slavery in Egypt is remembered nostalgically as a time of full stomachs, while the reality of oppression and death fades from memory. The human capacity for selective memory is on full display in the wilderness. God's response is both provision and test. I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. On the 6th day, they'll gather twice as much, because no manna will fall on the Sabbath. It's a lesson in daily dependence, in trusting God for tomorrow's needs, rather than hoarding today's provision. In the evening, quail come and cover the camp, providing meat. In the morning, thin flakes like frost appear on the ground. When the Israelites see it, they ask, "What is it?" Moses tells them it's the bread the Lord has given them to eat. They call it manna, which means, "What is it?" And it becomes their staple food for the next 40 years. The manna has specific rules. Each person is to gather an omer per day, enough for their needs, but not more. Those who gather much don't have too much, and those who gather little don't have too little. But some try to keep manna overnight, despite Moses' instructions, and it becomes full of maggots and stinks. On the 6th day, they gather twice as much, and this time it doesn't spoil, because the Sabbath is a day of rest when no manna falls. Some people go out on the Sabbath looking for manna anyway, but they find none. The Lord asks Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions?" The provision of manna is both miracle and discipline, sustaining life while teaching trust. It can't be hoarded or stored, forcing the people to depend on God's daily faithfulness. It's a physical reminder that life comes from God, not from human effort or planning. But water becomes a problem again at Rephidim, where there's none to be found. The people quarrel with Moses. "Give us water to drink." "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and livestock die of thirst?" Moses cries out to the Lord in desperation. "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." God tells Moses to take his staff and strike the rock at Horeb, and water will come out of it for the people to drink. Moses does this in the sight of the elders, and water flows from the rock. He names the place Massah and Meribah, testing and quarreling, because the Israelites tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" It's a question that reveals the heart of their struggle. Despite seeing miracle after miracle, from the plagues in Egypt to the parting of the sea to the daily provision of manna, they still doubt God's presence and care when facing new challenges. Faith, it seems, is not a one-time decision, but a daily choice to trust in the face of uncertainty. At Rephidim, the Israelites face their first military challenge since leaving Egypt. The Amalekites attack them, and Moses tells Joshua to choose men and fight while he stands on top of the hill with the staff of God in his hands. As long as Moses holds up his hands, Israel prevails, but when his hands drop, Amalek prevails. Moses' hands grow tired, so Aaron and Hur bring a stone for him to sit on and hold up his hands, one on each side, keeping them steady until sunset. Joshua defeats the Amalekite army with the sword, but Moses builds an altar and calls it "The Lord is my banner," because hands were lifted up against the throne of the Lord. It's a vivid picture of spiritual warfare, showing that battles are won not just through military might, but through dependence on God. The raised hands of Moses become a symbol of intercession, of the need for spiritual support in physical conflicts. Meanwhile, word of what's happening reaches Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, who comes to the wilderness, bringing Moses' wife Zipporah and his 2 sons. Jethro rejoices in all the good things the Lord has done for Israel, in rescuing them from the hand of the Egyptians. "Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods," he declares. But Jethro also observes that Moses is wearing himself out by trying to judge all disputes among the people personally. From morning till evening, people stand around Moses seeking decisions, and Jethro sees this isn't sustainable. What you are doing is not good. You and these people will only wear yourselves out. Jethro suggests a system of delegation. Moses should select capable men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They can serve as judges for most disputes, bringing only the difficult cases to Moses. Moses listens to his father-in-law and does everything he suggests. It's a wise reform that establishes a judicial system and prevents Moses from collapsing under the weight of trying to handle every problem personally. Leadership, the story suggests, involves knowing when to delegate and how to build sustainable systems. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites arrive at Mount Sinai and camp there in the desert. This mountain will become the defining location of their wilderness experience, the place where they receive not just the 10 Commandments, but an entire system of law and worship that will shape their identity as a nation. Moses goes up the mountain, and the Lord calls to him from there with words that frame everything that follows. This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. It's an extraordinary calling, to be God's treasured possession among all the peoples of the earth, to serve as priests, mediating between God and the nations, to be a holy nation, set apart for divine purposes. The people respond unanimously. We will do everything the Lord has said. But first they must be prepared for an encounter with the holy, For 3 days they consecrate themselves, washing their clothes and abstaining from sexual relations. On the morning of the 3rd day, thunder and lightning flash over the mountain. A thick cloud descends and a very loud trumpet blast sounds. Everyone in the camp trembles. Moses brings the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stand at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai is covered with smoke because the Lord descends on it in fire. The smoke billows up like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembles violently. The sound of the trumpet grows louder and louder. It's a theophany, a manifestation of the divine that overwhelms human senses. This isn't a gentle whisper or a still small voice, but a display of power that makes the very mountain shake. The people who have been complaining about food and water suddenly realize they're in the presence of something far beyond their understanding. From this mountain of fire and smoke come the 10 Commandments, spoken directly by God to all the people. The first 4 deal with humanity's relationship to God. No other gods, no idols, no misuse of God's name, keep the Sabbath holy. The last 6 govern human relationships. Honor parents, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't covet. These commandments aren't just religious rules, but the foundation for a just society. They protect the vulnerable, establish basic human rights, and create boundaries that make community life possible. They're both deeply spiritual and intensely practical, governing both heart attitudes and external actions. But the people are terrified by the direct encounter with God. When they see the thunder and lightning and hear the trumpet and see the mountain in smoke, they tremble with fear and stay at a distance. They beg Moses to speak to them instead of having God speak to them directly, lest they die. Moses tells them not to be afraid, that God has come to test them so that the fear of God will be with them to keep them from sinning. But the people remain at a distance while Moses approaches the thick darkness where God is. It establishes a pattern of mediation that will characterize Israel's relationship with God, with Moses serving as the go-between. What follows is an extensive legal code covering everything from treatment of slaves to property rights to religious festivals. These laws, often called the Book of the Covenant, show how the principles of the 10 Commandments work out in practical situations. They're remarkably progressive for their time, protecting the rights of foreigners, limiting the power of masters over slaves, and establishing principles of proportional justice. The people agree to all the Lord's words and laws, and Moses writes them down. Early the next morning, he builds an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Young Israelite men offer burnt offerings and sacrifice young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses takes half the blood from the sacrifices and puts it in bowls, and the other half he splashes against the altar. Then he takes the Book of the Covenant and reads it to the people, who respond, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Moses then sprinkles the blood on the people and says, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words." It's a solemn moment, sealing the covenant between God and Israel with blood, symbolizing the life and death seriousness of the relationship. The people have committed themselves to obey all of God's commands, though they don't yet understand how difficult that commitment will prove to be. Moses then goes up on the mountain, along with Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. They see the God of Israel, with something like a pavement of sapphire stone under his feet, clear as the very heavens. But God doesn't raise his hand against these leaders of Israel, and they see God and eat and drink in his presence, a sacred meal that seals their covenant relationship. The Lord calls Moses to come up higher on the mountain to receive the stone tablets with the law and commandments written by God's own finger. Moses tells the elders to wait for him and leaves Aaron and Hur in charge. As Moses enters the cloud, the glory of the Lord settles on Mount Sinai like a consuming fire on top of the mountain, visible to all the Israelites below. For 40 days and 40 nights, Moses remains on the mountain with God, receiving detailed instructions for building a tabernacle, a portable sanctuary where God will dwell among his people. The plans are incredibly specific, covering everything from the materials to be used to the dimensions of each component, from the design of the Ark of the Covenant to the garments of the priests. This tabernacle will be the center of Israel's worship, a place where heaven and earth meet, where the invisible God makes himself present among his people. It's to be built exactly according to the pattern shown to Moses on the mountain, with no deviation allowed. The craftsmanship required is beyond what the former slaves possess, so God fills certain individuals with divine skill to accomplish the work. But while Moses is on the mountain receiving these holy instructions, the people below grow restless. 40 days seems like an eternity when you're waiting in the wilderness, and Moses' absence creates anxiety and uncertainty. They don't know what's happened to him or whether he's coming back. The people gather around Aaron and make a request that will shatter the covenant they've just made. Come, make gods for us, who shall go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. It's a shocking reversal from covenant faithfulness to idolatry in the Aaron's space of weeks, left in charge and apparently unable to resist the pressure, tells them to bring the gold earrings from their wives, sons, and daughters. The people comply, and Aaron takes the gold and fashions it with a tool, making it into an image of a calf. The people declare, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." Aaron builds an altar in front of the calf and announces that tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. It's a tragic attempt to blend the true worship of God with pagan practices, creating a visible representation of the invisible deity. But God cannot be reduced to human craftsmanship or contained in golden images. The next day, the people rise early and sacrifice burnt offerings and present fellowship offerings. Then they sit down to eat and drink and get up to indulge in revelry. The Hebrew word suggests wild, sexually immoral celebration, the kind associated with pagan fertility rituals. The people who trembled at God's presence on the mountain now dance around a golden calf. On the mountain, the Lord tells Moses what's happening below. Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. They have been quick to turn away from what I commanded them, and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it. God's anger burns against the people, and he tells Moses to leave him alone, so his wrath may burn against them and destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation. It's a test of Moses' character and calling. Will he accept God's offer to start over with him? Or will he intercede for the people despite their betrayal? Moses chooses intercession. He pleads with the Lord not to destroy the people, reminding God of his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why should the Egyptians say, "It was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains"? Turn from your fierce anger and relent from this disaster against your people. The Lord relents from the disaster he had spoken of bringing on his people. But Moses still has to deal with the situation below. He comes down the mountain carrying the 2 stone tablets of the covenant law, written on both sides by the finger of God. Joshua meets him and hears the noise from the camp, thinking it might be the sound of war. But Moses recognizes it for what it is. It is not the sound of victory. It is not the sound of defeat. It is the sound of singing that I hear. When Moses approaches the camp and sees the calf and the dancing, his anger burns hot. He throws the tablets down and breaks them at the foot of the mountain. It's a symbolic act that matches the spiritual reality. The people have broken the covenant, so Moses breaks the physical tablets that represent it. He takes the calf they've made, burns it in the fire, grinds it to powder, scatters it on the water, and makes the Israelites drink it. The golden god they worshipped becomes bitter medicine they must swallow. Moses confronts Aaron about his role in this disaster. What did this people do to you that you led them into such great sin? Aaron's response reveals both his weakness and his dishonesty. He blames the people's evil desires, then gives a ridiculous account of how the calf was made. I threw the gold into the fire, and out came this calf. Moses sees that the people are running wild because Aaron has let them get out of control and become a laughingstock to their enemies. He stands at the entrance to the camp and calls out, "Whoever is for the Lord, come to me." All the Levites rally to him, and he gives them a shocking command. Each man is to strap a sword to his side and go back and forth through the camp, killing brother, friend, and neighbor who participated in the idolatry. The Levites carry out Moses' orders, and about 3,000 people die that day. Moses tells the Levites they've been set apart to the Lord because they were willing to act against even their own sons and brothers. It's a harsh judgment that shows how seriously God takes covenant breaking. The people who witnessed his power, agreed to his laws, and sealed the covenant with blood have violated their commitment in the most fundamental way. The consequences are swift and severe, establishing that there's a cost to unfaithfulness. The next day Moses tells the people they've committed a great sin, but he'll go up to the Lord to see if he can make atonement for their sin. He returns to God and makes an extraordinary offer. If you will forgive their sin, go; if not, bad. But written.ot me out of the book you have. It's the heart of a true leader, willing to be lost himself if it means saving his people. But God responds that whoever has he sinned against him will blot out of his book. The guilty must bear their own punishment. However, God agrees to continue leading the people toward the promised land, though his angel will go before them instead of his direct presence. When the people hear this disturbing word, they mourn, and no one puts on ornaments. God has told Moses to tell them they're a stiff-necked people, and if he were to go with them even for a moment, he might destroy them. The intimacy of God's presence, which should be their greatest blessing, has become dangerous because of their unfaithfulness. Moses takes the tent of meeting and pitches it outside the camp, far away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the camp. When this tent outside Moses goes out to the tent, all the people rise and stand at the entrances to their tents, watching him until he enters. As Moses enters the tent, the pillar of cloud comes down and stays at the entrance while the Lord speaks with Moses. When all the people see the pillar of cloud at the entrance to the tent, they stand and worship, each at the entrance to their tent. The Lord speaks to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. But Moses wants more than restored relationship. He wants assurance of God's continued presence. He pleads with the Lord, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" God agrees to Moses' request because he's found favor in God's sight and is known by name. But when Moses asks to see God's glory, he's told that no one can see God's face and live. However, God promises to make all his goodness pass before Moses and proclaim his name before him. Gophed in the rock and covers, places Moses in a seal him with his hand while his glory passes by, then removes his hand so Moses can see his back. As promised, God passes in front of Moses and proclaims his name. The Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. This revelation of God's character becomes one of the most quoted passages in the Old Testament, showing that, while God is holy and just, he's also merciful and forgiving. Moses immediately bows to the ground and worships, asking once more that the Lord go with them, despite their stiff-necked nature. God renews the covenant, promising to drive out the nations before Israel and perform wonders never done in any nation. But he warns to make treaties them not with the people of the land or worship their gods, lest they must break down the altars, ensnared, smash the sacred stones, and cut down the Asherah poles of the nations they displace. Moses stays on the mountain another 40 days and 40 nights, neither eating bread nor drinking water, while God writes on the tablets the words, the 10 Commandments. Of the covenant, when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai carrying the 2 tablets, his face is radiant because he has spoken with the Lord, though he doesn't realize it. Aaron and all the Israelites see Moses' shining face and are afraid to come near him. Moses calls to them, and Aaron and the leaders come back to him. Then Moses speaks to them. Afterward, all the Israelites come near, and he gives them all the commands the Lord has given him on Mount Sinai. When Moses finishes speaking to them, he puts a veil over his face. But whenever he enters the Lord's presence to speak with him, he removes the veil until he comes out. Then he tells the Israelites what he's been commanded, and they see that his face is radiant. Moses puts the veil back over his face until he goes in to speak with the Lord again. The work of building the tabernacle begins with an offering from the people. Everyone whose heart is willing is invited to bring materials: gold, silver, bronze, fine linen, animal skins, wool stones. The response to oil, spices, and precious is overwhelming. The people bring so much that Moses has to restrain them from bringing more. Bezalel and Oholiab, filled with divine skill, lead the construction along with every skilled person to whom the Lord has given ability. The work proceeds exactly according to the pattern shown to Moses on the mountain. Every detail matches God's specifications, from the intricate embroidery on the priestly garments to the precise dimensions of the altar. When all the work is completed, Moses inspects everything and sees that the people have done it just as the Lord commanded. So Moses blesses them. On the first day of the first month in the second year, the tabernacle is set up according to the Lord's instructions. Moses arranges everything in its proper place and anoints the tabernacle and everything in it to consecrate them. Then the cloud covers the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord fills the tabernacle. Moses cannot enter because the cloud has settled on it, and the glory of the Lord fills it. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifts from above the tabernacle, they set out. But if the cloud does not lift, they do not set out until it does. The book of Exodus ends with this image of God's presence dwelling among his people, guiding their movements through the wilderness. The cloud of the Lord is over the tabernacle by day, and fire is in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. But the story doesn't end there. The people who'd such have experienced dramatic deliverance and divine presence still have much to learn about what it means to be God's people. The wilderness will be their classroom for an entire generation, and the lessons will often be harder than they expect. In the book of Leviticus, which follows immediately, God provides detailed instructions for worship, sacrifice, and holy living. These aren't arbitrary rules, but guidelines for maintaining relationship with a holy God who has chosen to dwell among an imperfect people. Every aspect of life, from what they eat to how they treat the poor, becomes part of their calling to be set apart. The sacrificial system established in Leviticus provides a way for the people to deal with sin and maintain fellowship with God. Different offerings serve different purposes: burnt offerings for dedication, grain offerings for thanksgiving, peace offerings for fellowship, sin offerings for forgiveness, and guilt offerings for restitution. The Day of Atonement becomes the climax of the religious calendar, when the high priest enters the most holy place once a year to make atonement for all the sins of the people. It's a solemn reminder that sin separates people but from God. Also, a gracious provision that separation need not be permanent. Throughout Leviticus, the refrain repeats, "Be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy." It's both a command and an invitation, a challenge and a promise. God's people are called to reflect his character in their relationships, their business dealings, their treatment of foreigners and the disadvantaged. The book of Numbers picks up the story 18 months after the Israelites left Egypt. They're camped at Mount Sinai, organized by tribes around the tabernacle, ready to continue their journey to the Promised Land. A census numbers the fighting men at over 600,000, suggesting a total population of perhaps 2 million people. But what should have been an 11-day journey from Sinai to the Promised Land becomes a 40-year wandering because of the peoplelessness. At continued faith, Kadesh Barnea, on the very border of Canaan, 12 spies are sent to explore the land. They return with evidence of its fertility, clusters of grapes so large it takes 2 men to carry them. But 10 of the spies give a discouraging report. The people living there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Only Joshua and Caleb urged the people to trust God and take possession of the land. The people's response reveals how little their wilderness experiences have changed their hearts. They weep aloud all night and grumble against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in Egypt, or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? They even talk about choosing a leader to take them back to Egypt, back to slavery rather than forward to promise. Moses and Aaron fall face down before the whole assembly, while Joshua and Caleb tear their clothes and plead with the people not to rebel against the Lord. But the assembly talks about stoning them until the glory of the Lord appears at the tent of meeting before all the Israelites. God asks Moses how long these people will treat him with contempt. How long will they refuse to believe, despite all the signs he's performed among them? The judgment is swift and final. Not one of the men who saw God's glory and performed signs in Egypt and the wilderness, but disobeyed and tested him 10 times, will see the promised land. Only Joshua and Caleb, who followed the Lord wholeheartedly, will enter. The rest will wander in the wilderness for 40 years until their bodies fall in the desert. It is a devastating consequence for moment of faithlessness, but it reveals something important about the of promise, nature, and faith. The land isn't taken by military might, but by trust in God's promises. Those who refuse to believe, despite overwhelming evidence of God's faithfulness, disqualify themselves from experiencing his ultimate blessing. The 40 years of wilderness wandering that follow are punctuated by rebellion, judgment, and God's continued faithfulness. When the people complain about their food, fire from the Lord burns among them. When Miriam and Aaron challenge Moses' authority, Miriam is struck with leprosy. When Korah leads a rebellion against Moses and Aaron's leadership, the earth opens up and swallows the rebels. Yet through it all, God continues to provide. Water flows from rocks, manna falls each morning. Their clothes don't wear out, their feet don't swell. It's a long, slow lesson in dependence and trust, preparing a new generation for the challenges of conquering and settling the promised land. Near the end of the 40 years, as the older generation dies off and a new one prepares to enter Canaan, Moses himself makes a crucial mistake. When the people again complain about lack of water at Meribah, God tells Moses to speak to the rock and it will pour out water. But Moses, perhaps frustrated by 4 decades of complaints and rebellion, strikes the rock twice with his staff instead of speaking to it. Water gushes out abundantly, but God tells Moses and Aaron that because they didn't trust him enough to honor him as holy before the Israelites, they won't bring the community into the promised land. It's a heartbreaking moment. Moses, who has led the people through every crisis, who has interceded for them repeatedly, who has sacrificed his own comfort for their welfare, will not enter the land he spent his life trying to reach. Sometimes the consequences of our actions extend beyond what seems fair or proportional. As the 40 years draw to a close, the book of Deuteronomy presents Moses' final speeches to the people. Standing on the plains of Moab, within sight of the promised land, Moses reviews their history, repeats the law, and prepares them for life without his leadership. His words are both warning and encouragement. He reminds them of God's faithfulness through the wilderness years, but also of the consequences of disobedience. He calls them to love the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, and strength, and to teach God's commands diligently to their children. Moses knows his time is ending. At 120 years old, his eyes are still clear and his strength unabated. But God has told him he will die before entering Canaan. He climbs Mount Nebo, and the Lord shows him the whole land from Dan to Beersheba, saying, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to their descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." Moses dies there in Moab, and the Lord buries him in a valley, though no one knows where his grave is to this day. The Israelites grieve for him 30 days. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, and who performed all the mighty power and awesome deeds in the sight of all Israel. But the story continues with Joshua, Moses' successor, who leads the people across the Jordan River into the Promised Land. The conquest of Canaan unfolds through divine intervention and human courage. From the walls of Jericho falling at the sound of trumpets, to the sun standing still at Gibeon. Yet even in the Promised Land, the pattern of faithfulness and rebellion continues. The book of Judges shows a repeated cycle. The people turn away from God, fall under oppression, cry out for deliverance, and are rescued by judges whom God raises up. But each generation seems to forget the lessons of the previous one. The stories of the judges are both inspiring and troubling. Deborah leads to Israel victory over the Canaanites. Gideon defeats the Midianites with just 300 men and some trumpets and torches. Samson single-handedly fights the Philistines with supernatural strength. But human weakness and moral failure thread through their stories too. The book ends with the dark observation that in those days Israel had no king and everyone did as they saw fit. It's a setup for the next phase of the story, when the people will demand a king like the nations around them, not understanding that they already have a king in heaven. The books of Samuel tell the story of Israel's transition from judges to kings, beginning with the prophet Samuel, who bridges the old era and the new. His mother Hannah, barren and desperate, prays fervently for a son and promises to dedicate him to God's her service if prayer is answered. When Samuel is born, Hannah keeps her vow, bringing him to the tabernacle as a young child to serve under Eli the priest. Her song of praise echoes Mary's Magnificat centuries later, celebrating God's power to lift up the humble and bring down the proud. Samuel grows up in God's presence and becomes the last of the judges and the first of the great prophets. When the people demand a king, Samuel is reluctant, seeing it as a rejection of God's rule. But God tells him to listen to the people, warning them of the consequences while granting their request. The first king, Saul, starts well, but gradually reveals fatal flaws. His impatience leads him to offer sacrifices he's not authorized to make. His incomplete obedience in destroying the Amalekites costs him the kingdom. His jealousy toward David drives him to murderous rage that consumes his final years. David, the shepherd boy who kills Goliath with a sling and a stone, becomes the greatest king in Israel's history. His psalms reveal a heart that pursues God despite his own failures and sins. His reign establishes Jerusalem as the capital and brings the Ark of the Covenant there with great celebration. But David includes dark chapters too. His adultery with Bathsheba and the murder of her husband Uriah show how even a man after God's own heart can fall into terrible sin. The consequences ripple through his family for years, with rebellion, rape, and murder among his own children. Yet David's response to confrontation about his sin sets him apart. When the prophet Nathan tells him a parable about a rich man who steals a poor man's only lamb, David is outraged at the injustice. Nathan's response is devastating. You are the man. But David doesn't make excuses or blame others. He confesses his sin and repents genuinely. Solomon, David's son, begins his reign with wisdom that amazes the world. His judgment between two women claiming the same baby becomes legendary. His wealth and building projects, including the magnificent temple in Jerusalem, make Israel a major power. Kings and queens travel from distant lands to hear his wisdom. But Solomon's story becomes a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power and wealth. His many foreign wives lead him to worship their gods. His heavy taxation and forced labor create resentment among the people. By the end of his reign, the kingdom is ready to split apart. And split it does. Solomon's son Rehoboam foolishly refuses to ease the burdens his father imposed, leading to a civil war that divides the kingdom permanently. The northern 10 tribes form the kingdom of Israel, while the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin remain loyal to David's dynasty. What follows is a long, sad story of decline and apostasy. The northern kingdom never has a good king, quickly falling into idol worship and moral corruption. The southern kingdom has some godly kings who bring temporary reforms, but the overall trajectory is downward. Prophets arise in both kingdoms, voices calling the people back to faithfulness, but their warnings often fall on deaf ears. Elijah confronts the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, calling down fire from heaven to prove that the Lord is God. Yet even after this dramatic demonstration, Queen Jezebel threatens his life, and he flees into the wilderness, discouraged and alone. There in a cave, Elijah experiences something unexpected. God is not in the earthquake, not in the fire, not in the mighty wind, but in a gentle whisper, a still small voice that speaks more powerfully than any display of natural force. It's a reminder that divine presence often comes quietly, in ways we might miss if we're only looking for the spectacular. Elijah's successor, Elisha, performs twice as many miracles as his mentor, healing the sick, raising the dead, feeding the hungry. But the hearts of the people remain largely unchanged. They want the benefits of God's power without the commitment of faithful relationship. The prophet's messages follow similar themes across the centuries. Justice for the oppressed, care for widows and orphans, genuine worship rather than empty ritual, faithfulness to the covenant, warnings of coming judgment if the people don't change their ways. These aren't popular messages, and many prophets suffer persecution or death for speaking them. Isaiah prophesies during the reigns of 4 kings of Judah, his career spanning nearly half a century. His vision of God in the temple, high and lifted up with seraphim calling holy, 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 transforms him from a man of unclean lips into a messenger willing to say, "Here I am, send me." His prophecies range from immediate political situations to distant messianic hope. Jeremiah is called the weeping prophet, his heart breaking as he watches his beloved Jerusalem move inexorably toward destruction. He's forbidden to marry or have children because the times are so dark. He's thrown into cisterns, imprisoned, mocked, and ignored. But he cannot stop speaking the words God gives him, even when they burn in his heart like fire. Ezekiel prophesies among the exiles in Babylon, his dramatic actions and vivid visions illustrating God's messages. He lies on his side for over a year to symbolize the siege of Jerusalem. He shaves his head and divides the hair into thirds to represent what will happen to the city's inhabitants. His vision of the Valley of Dry Bones becoming a living army offers hope that what seems dead can be resurrected. Daniel and his friends are taken as young men to serve in Nebuchadnezzar's court in Babylon. Their refusal to eat the king's food, to bow to his golden statue, to stop praying to their God, shows that faithfulness is possible even in exile, even under pressure to conform to foreign ways. Daniel's interpretation of dreams and visions reveals God's sovereignty over human kingdoms. The statue with the head of gold, chest of silver, belly of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of mixed iron and clay represents successive empires, all temporary, all destined to be replaced by God's eternal kingdom. The writing on the wall at Belshazzar's feast spells doom for Babylon. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You have been weighed and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That very night the prophecy is fulfilled. Hosea's marriage to the unfaithful Gomer becomes a living parable of God's relationship with Israel. Despite her adultery and abandonment, he continues to love her, to pursue her, to offer restoration. It's a painful picture of divine love that won't give up, even when it's rejected and betrayed. Joel's prophecy of a locust plague becomes a metaphor for the coming day of the Lord, but also contains the promise that God will pour out his Spirit on all people. Amos, a shepherd and fig grower, pronounces judgment on Israel's social injustice and empty religiosity. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Jonah tries to run away from his calling to preach to Nineveh, that great enemy city, but finds that you can't flee from God's presence. Swallowed by a great fish, he prays from its belly and is given a second chance. When Nineveh repents at his preaching, Jonah is angry that God shows mercy to his enemies, revealing how hard it is to embrace God's compassion for those we consider unworthy. Through all these prophetic voices, a pattern emerges. God's people repeatedly turn away from him, suffer consequences, cry out for help, and are restored, only to repeat the cycle again. Yet through it all, promises of future hope thread through the darkness like golden threads in a dark tapestry. The northern kingdom falls first, conquered by Assyria in 722 BCE. The 10 tribes are scattered among the nations, disappearing from history as a distinct people. The southern kingdom of Judah lasts longer, but eventually faces the same fate when Babylon destroys Jerusalem and carries the people into exile in 586 BCE. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple is catastrophic for the Jewish people. How can they sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? How can they worship without the temple? How can God's promises be true if his people are defeated and scattered? The Book of Lamentations captures their grief and confusion, yet even in exile, hope persists. Jeremiah writes a letter to the exiles telling them to settle down, build houses, plant gardens, seek the welfare of the city where they've been sent. The exile isn't permanent. After 70 years, God will bring them back to their land. Daniel's prophecies provide a timeline and framework for understanding these events within God's larger plan. The exile isn't abandonment, but discipline. Not the end of the story, but preparation for a new chapter. When Cyrus of Persia conquers Babylon, his first act is to release the Jewish exiles and encourage them to return to their homeland. It's exactly 50 years after the first deportation, fulfilling Jeremiah's prophecy. Some choose to return immediately. Others remain in the comfortable lives they've built in Babylon. Zerubbabel leads the first group of returnees back to Jerusalem, where they begin rebuilding the temple. But the work is slow and discouraging. The foundation they lay seems pathetic compared to Solomon's magnificent structure. Enemies oppose the work, and the people lose heart. The prophets Haggai and Zechariah encourage the builders to continue. The glory of this latter house will be greater than the former, Haggai promises, not because of its physical splendor, but because of what God will do there. Zechariah's visions of lampstands and olive trees, flying scrolls and women in baskets, point toward a future restoration that goes far beyond rebuilding walls and temple. Ezra the priest brings another group of exiles back to Jerusalem, carrying with him the law of Moses and a passion for teaching it to the people. When he discovers that many have married foreign wives, compromising their distinct identity as God's people, he leads a painful but necessary reform. Nehemiah, cupbearer to the Persian king, receives permission to return and rebuild Jerusalem's walls. Despite opposition from local governors who see the rebuilding as a threat to their power, the work is completed in just 52 days. When the wall is finished and the gates are hung, Nehemiah calls for Ezra to read the law to all the people. The reading lasts from morning until midday, and the people weep when they hear the words of the law, realizing how far they've strayed from God's commands. But Nehemiah tells them not to weep, but to celebrate, because the joy of the Lord is their strength. They observe the Feast of Tabernacles as it hasn't been observed since the days of Joshua. This scene of the people gathered to hear God's word marks a crucial shift in Jewish identity. No longer a kingdom with temple and sacrifice at the center, they become a people of the book, defined by their commitment to Torah and their hope in God's promises. The final books of the Old Testament reflect this transition. Malachi addresses the spiritual lethargy of the post-exilic community, calling them to honor God with their tithes and offerings, to remain faithful in marriage, to stop wearying God with their complaints. His prophecy ends with a promise to send Elijah the prophet before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Then comes silence. 400 years pass without recorded prophetic word, without new scripture, without direct divine revelation. It's a time of waiting, of longing, of wondering if God has forgotten his promises. The people endure conquest by Alexander the Great, rule by his successors, persecution under Antiochus Epiphanes, brief independence under the Maccabees, and finally subjugation by Rome. Into this world of waiting and longing, a child is born in Bethlehem. The New Testament opens not with fanfare, but with a genealogy, tracing Jesus' lineage back through David to Abraham, connecting this new beginning to all the ancient promises. Matthew's Gospel presents Jesus as the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, the one to whom all the law and prophets point. Luke tells the story differently, focusing on the human drama of ordinary people caught up in extraordinary events. Mary, a young virgin, receives an angelic announcement that she will bear God's son. Her response, "Let it be unto me according to your word," echoes the faith of Abraham setting out for an unknown land. Joseph, faced with his betrothed's pregnancy, receives his own angelic visitation in a dream. The child she carries is conceived by the Holy Spirit and will save his people from their sins. The name Jesus means Yahweh saves, connecting this baby to the covenant name of God revealed to Moses at the burning bush. The birth itself happens away from home in a stable in Bethlehem because there's no room in the inn. The Saviour of the world enters quietly, announced not to kings and priests, but to shepherds watching their flocks in nearby fields. The angel's message is simple but profound. Do not be afraid, for I bring you good news of great joy that will be for all people. John's Gospel steps back to see this birth in cosmic terms. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The eternal Word through whom all things were made becomes flesh and dwells among us, full of grace and truth. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Jesus' early years are mostly hidden from us. We know about the flight to Egypt to escape Herod's massacre, the return to Nazareth, one story of his visit to the temple at age 12. Then silence again until he emerges as an adult to be baptized by John in the Jordan River. John the Baptist is the voice crying in the wilderness that Isaiah prophesied, preparing the way for the Lord. His message is simple: repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. When Jesus comes to be baptized, John protests that he needs to be baptized by Jesus, not the other way around. But Jesus insists it's necessary to fulfill all righteousness. As Jesus comes up from the water, the heavens open, the Spirit descends like a dove, and a voice from heaven declares, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." It's a Trinitarian moment that reveals the complex unity of God in ways the Old Testament only hinted at. Immediately, the Spirit drives Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil for 40 days. The temptations echo Israel's testing in the wilderness, but where Israel failed, Jesus succeeds. He defeats each temptation not with miraculous power, but with Scripture, showing that the Word of God is sufficient for every spiritual battle. Jesus begins his public ministry by calling disciples, ordinary fishermen who leave their nets to follow him. His first recorded sermon in Luke's Gospel sets the tone for everything that follows. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus announces, is at hand. But this kingdom doesn't look like what people expect. It's not about political power or military conquest, but about transformed hearts and restored relationships. The poor are blessed, the meek inherit the earth, the peacemakers are called children of God. Jesus teaches in parables, simple stories that reveal profound truths about God's kingdom. A sower scatters seed on different types of soil. A mustard seed grows into a great tree. A treasure hidden in a field is worth selling everything to obtain. A pearl of great price demands total commitment. These stories lodge in the memory and unfold their meaning over time. His miracles authenticate his message and reveal his compassion. He heals the sick, gives sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf, mobility to the lame. He feeds thousands with a few loaves and fish, showing that God's provision exceeds human need. He calms storms, walks on water, raises the dead, demonstrating authority over nature and death itself. But perhaps most remarkably, he forgives sins, claiming a prerogative that belongs to God alone. When religious leaders object that only God can forgive sins, Jesus responds by healing a paralytic, showing that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. This claim to divine authority increasingly brings Jesus into conflict with the religious establishment. They see him as a threat to their position and influence. When he cleanses the temple, driving out the money changers and declaring that his Father's house should be a house of prayer, not a den of robbers, they begin plotting his death. Jesus knows what awaits him in Jerusalem. 3 times he tells his disciples he will be betrayed, crucified, and rise again on the 3rd day. But they don't understand, perhaps because they can't imagine that the Messiah would suffer and die rather than conquer and reign. The last week of Jesus' life unfolds with the inevitability of ancient prophecy. He enters Jerusalem riding on a donkey as crowds shout, "Hosanna," fulfilling Zechariah's vision of the king coming humble and riding on a donkey. He celebrates the Passover with his disciples, transforming the ancient meal into something new. Taking bread, he breaks it and says, "This is my body, which is broken for you." Taking the cup, he says, "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the forgiveness of sins." The sacrifice that all the Old Testament offerings pointed toward is about to be fulfilled in his own death. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus wrestles with the reality of what lies ahead. His prayer, "Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me, yet not my will but yours be done," echoes through the ages as the perfect expression of surrender to God's will, even when it leads through suffering. The betrayal, arrest, trials, and crucifixion happen with swift brutality. Judas identifies him with a kiss. Peter denies knowing him 3 times. Pilate finds no fault in him, but yields to political pressure and sentences him to death. The soldiers mock him as King of the Jews, not knowing they speak prophetic truth. On the cross, Jesus fulfills the role of sacrificial lamb that John the Baptist had identified at his baptism. "Behold the Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world." As he dies, he cries out, "It is finished, the work of redemption complete." But death cannot hold him. On the 3rd day, women going to anoint his body find the tomb empty and angels announcing he has risen just as he said. The resurrection appearances that follow transform the disciples from fearful, scattered followers into bold witnesses who will turn the world upside down. The book of Acts tells how the gospel spreads from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth, just as Jesus promised. The day of Pentecost sees the Spirit poured out on all flesh, as Joel prophesied, with tongues of fire and speech in languages from every nation under heaven. Peter, who denied Jesus in his hour of trial, becomes the rock on which the early church is built. His sermon at Pentecost results in 3,000 conversions. The apostles perform signs and wonders, and the church grows daily as believers share all things in common and worship with glad hearts. Paul, formerly Saul the persecutor, encounters the risen Christ on the road to Damascus and becomes the apostle to the Gentiles. His missionary journeys carry the gospel throughout the Roman world, establishing churches in major cities, and writing letters that become part of the New Testament canon. The letters of Paul, Peter, John, and others provide theological interpretation of what Jesus accomplished and practical guidance for Christian living. They address issues of faith and works, law and grace, unity and diversity, suffering and hope, always pointing back to Christ as the center and source of Christian life. The book of Revelation, written by John during his exile on Patmos, pulls back the curtain to show the cosmic significance of Christ's victory. Though persecution rages and evil seems triumphant, the Lamb who was slain is worthy to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise. The vision culminates with a new heaven and new earth, the new Jerusalem coming down from God, like a bride adorned for her husband. The dwelling place of God is with humanity, and he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death and mourning and crying and pain will be no more, because the former things have passed away. And so, the great story that began in a garden with humanity's first disobedience ends in a city where God dwells with his people forever. The tree of life, barred since Eden, grows again beside the river of life, its leaves for the healing of the nations. The curse is lifted, the exile ended, the promises fulfilled. The final words of Revelation echo with both ending and beginning, like the last notes of a symphony that somehow contain all the music that came before. He who testifies to these things says, "Surely I am coming soon." And John responds, "Amen. Come, Lord Jesus." It's a prayer that has been whispered by countless voices across centuries, a longing that bridges the gap between promise and fulfillment. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about this vast collection of stories isn't how it ends, but how it continues. Because the Bible doesn't really conclude so much as it opens outward, like ripples spreading from a stone dropped in still water. The story it tells became the story that shaped civilizations, inspired art, comforted the dying, and challenged the powerful. Think about the journey we've taken tonight, from that first moment when light pierced the darkness to the final vision of a city where there is no night, because the Lord God gives it light. We've walked with wanderers and kings, prophets and peasants, through deserts and into promised lands, through exile and return, through death and resurrection. Each story has been both complete in itself and part of something larger, like individual notes that only make sense when heard as part of a greater melody. Abraham's willingness to leave everything familiar, Joseph's forgiveness of the brothers who betrayed him, Moses confronting Pharaoh with nothing but a staff and a divine promise, David facing Goliath with a sling and absolute trust, Esther risking her life for her people, Daniel remaining faithful in a foreign court, and threading through all of these human stories, the persistent presence of something beyond human understanding, something that calls people forward into purposes they couldn't have imagined for themselves. Not always gentle, not always comfortable, but always moving towards some greater fulfillment, some deeper healing. The people in these stories aren't perfect. They doubt, they fail, they make terrible choices that hurt themselves and others. Abraham lies about Sarah being his sister. Jacob deceives his father and cheats his brother. Moses murders an Egyptian and later strikes the rock in anger. David commits adultery and murder. Solomon's wisdom turns to foolishness. Peter denies Jesus 3 times, yet somehow their failures become part of the larger story of redemption. Their mistakes woven into a pattern they couldn't see while they were living it. It's as if the narrator of this great epic specializes in using broken instruments to create beautiful music, in writing straight with crooked lines. And perhaps that's the most comforting thing about these ancient stories as you drift off to sleep tonight. They don't demand perfection from their characters or from their readers. They acknowledge that life is complicated, that good people do bad things, that the right choice isn't always clear, that suffering often comes to those who least deserve it. But they also insist that none of this is meaningless, that even in the darkest chapters, there are hints of dawn, that endings can become beginnings, that what looks like defeat might actually be victory seen from a different angle. The Bible you've heard tonight isn't just ancient history, though it is that. It's not just literature, though it's certainly that too. It's a mirror and a window, reflecting human nature while opening onto something larger than human understanding. It's a map and a mystery, offering direction while acknowledging that the destination is beyond anything we can fully grasp. As you let these stories settle into the quiet places of your mind, remember that they were told around countless fires, copied by hand in monastery cells, whispered by parents to children, sung by congregations, pondered by scholars, and treasured by people who found in them something worth preserving across millennia. So rest now, knowing that these ancient voices have spoken their truths into the darkness, that these stories have been told and retold around countless fires across the centuries. The Bible you've journeyed through tonight isn't just a collection of old tales, but a living conversation between human hearts and the divine mystery that calls them forward. Sleep well, fellow traveler, and let these whispers of eternity carry you gently into dreams where all stories find their meaning.